affected in one way or another by these lockdowns.
Yeah!
The jabs.
Yeah!
There's been a lot of other issues that have stemmed from the lockdowns that I think are more of a concern than COVID. How about people trying to kill themselves? Is that not an issue? Drug overdoses? Families fighting? Kids not being able to get the help that they need? Can you imagine? Alberta already had a really crappy mental health system before COVID. Can you imagine how it's going to be, what these kids are going to go through and have gone through? They're not going to get the help. There's just so much family violence, and we need to end this now. Anyway, I can go on. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Mr. George Baird is a principled, strong visionary and influential leader with a very unique gift of identifying and connecting key people. He has a talent to build strong, principled, world-class teams. As the National Director of Victims of Violence in the Canadian criminal justice system, he advocated in Parliament and across the country for surviving family members who lost loved ones to homicide. He personally spearheaded Canada's first and only national unsolved homicide research and identification program. He also established a national missing children's registry. It was only natural that George would end up spearheading yet another advocacy group, but this time for all Canadians and for all their God-given inherent charter rights. With the help of Chairman of the Board, Premier Brian Peckford, the last surviving signatory of the Charter, and co-founder Roy Beyer, George has succeeded in putting together a team like no other to battle the tyranny of the current Trudeau dictatorship by taking back our freedom! The very God-given freedoms enshrined in the Canadian Charter. Give it up for George.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back in Edmonton, Alberta. I had the privilege of living in Edmonton from 1991 to 1996. And I love Edmonton. It's the city of champions.
Never been to Calgary, I guess.
Please don't hold this against me, but I live in Calgary now.
Okay, there you go. Now I'm friends with you again.
Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here today. It's a troubling day in Canada. If any of you have seen some of the terrible scenes of police brutality in Ottawa last weekend, it's a terrible thing. But I also want to give a shout out to the RCMP and the police who are here today. I believe in peaceful protest. My good friend, former Newfoundland Premier Brian Peckford. He's not only the only living First Minister to have signed the Constitution and the Charter of Rights in 1982. In 1981, they came to an impasse with Justin Trudeau's dad, Pierre Trudeau. And if it was left to Ontario and New Brunswick, we would have had that tyranny 40 years ago. But there was one premier in September of 1981 who said no to Pierre Trudeau. And that premier's name was then Newfoundland Premier Brian Peckford. stood alone in early September 1991, and after a couple of days, I come from Prince Edward Island. He had then Prince Edward Island Premier Angus MacLean on his side. And then he had Alberta Premier Peter Lougheed. And then they formed the Gang of Eight, including René Lévesque. And the chair of that Gang of Eight, when I say eight, Ontario and New Brunswick sided with Pierre Trudeau. The other provinces joined the chairman of that Gang of Eight, and his name was Premier Brian Peckford. And they won a case in the Supreme Court of Canada in late September 1981. And they passed their impasse, and they had further negotiations. Now enshrined in our Constitution and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, headed up by then Chairman Brian Peckford, we have a right to peaceful protest. Say it with me. We have a right to peaceful protest. We have a right to peaceful protest. I've had the great privilege of being one of the founders of Taking Back Our Freedoms. And that's what we're going to do. Can you hear me? Taking back our freedoms! Taking back our freedoms! Taking back our freedoms! On our board of advisors, we have some wonderful doctors. The next speaker is one of my dearest friends, Dr. Roger Hodkinson. We also have